ready. I'd like to thank my fellow elected officials for participating in this press conference. Sheriff Dave Favro, Clinton County Legislature Chair Harry McManus, and Clinton County Legislative Chair of Public Safety Mark Henry. Thank you very much. On behalf of the Village of Champlain Board of Trustees, I would like to inform the public that following numerous complaints of vandalism and other issues relating to children under the age of 18 in the village, a curfew law has been enacted by a board vote on November 4th, 2019. This law states that it shall be unlawful for any child under the age of 18 to loiter, peddle, or remain on any village streets or public places between the hours of 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. unless accompanied by a parent or guardian or other person having legal control. There are exceptions, such as being on an errand directed by a parent, coming and going from work or a school activity, among others. For further details, please read this law. Copies are available here at the village office or can be sent electronically. Thank you.
Sure. I would really like to applaud the village board and the mayor. Several times over this past summer I had come up and we had a couple meetings on a few issues that were going on in the community. The goal here is public safety, is to keep our youth safe, is to keep our families safe, and to preserve the integrity of our community. Here in the village of Champlain, this allows us an opportunity as law enforcement. It gives us a tool to be able to stop and ask youth questions. For example, it could be 2 o'clock in the morning and it could be a group of 6 or 8 younger people out walking the streets. And if law enforcement would approach them and say, you know, what are you doing and what is your name and how old are you? We're not doing anything wrong, we don't need to speak, and they can walk away. And unless you have a specific incident that you're going to be apprehending these people on, it made it very difficult for law enforcement to get any further information. This is a tool that I used very effectively in the city of Plattsburgh for decades, and it's one that actually I can come out and say has saved lives, because it's kept young, vulnerable people, impressionable people from getting involved with individuals who would be wandering around the streets at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. I think we all have to be in agreement. At that hour, in the middle of the night, there's not an awful lot of productivity that's going on. Usually it's some type of nefarious activity, or it could be curious kids. But the way this law is written here in the village, it gives law enforcement the opportunity to push it through the system, and a potential financial fine could be imposed to the families. It also gives us an opportunity to use the family court system if necessary. Neither of those two are the point objective of this. The point objective of this is to be able to allow us to stop and ask questions, and most importantly in itself, for the community to get engaged in it, to prevent the kids from being on the streets. We want our youth to be safe, and we want to protect the integrity of our community. So again, I applaud you, Madam Mayor, and I applaud your board as well. It was very expeditiously researched and taken into good advice and followed through with, so I thank you.
Thank you. Harry?
Yes, let me just start by saying, as a former mayor in Rouse's Point, that this is one of the most serious things that I think any governmental entity can put forth. It shows we had to do it in Rouse's Point back in the 70s. Vandalism was rampant downtown, in the downtown area, and there was a lot of debate that went into this. But I think the other piece of this is the fact that in you calling a press conference, it involves the whole community in terms of potential looking out your window and saying, here's some kids out here and they're not supposed to be there. And so I think because sometimes we pass laws and we don't get the word out to everybody that this is part of what we think it's a serious situation. I'll just mention one other thing, and you and I have had this conversation before. There has been vandalism on the rec trail, and it's been primarily between here and 276, although there's been some on the other side also. And so I think what this speaks to is the issue of public safety, which is one of the most primary things that a government can do for its citizens. So I applaud the efforts here. But I'm really excited about the fact that we're trying to involve the entire community in a decision-making process.
Well, I think it's a great idea to announce this publicly, as the chairman said. I can echo the remarks of the sheriff in the sense that I was a law enforcement officer as well. And where I was a law enforcement officer, we had a curfew. It worked very well for keeping the kids off the street. As a town supervisor recently in Shazy, we had experience with vandalism as well. And it's very frustrating to everyone, the community organizations that helped, the volunteers that maybe helped put something together, the taxpayers as well. It's very frustrating to do that, work so hard, have to build something nice, and then have it damaged or destroyed by vandalism. And then two, it is the safety of the kids that are out on the street. They always say that nothing good ever happens after midnight, and I think there's a very good reason for that. So I think it's a great idea. I certainly support it, and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming.
Was there anything, there was vandalism throughout the village? Is that what was happening?
There were numerous acts of vandalism. There was some theft. There were kids throwing rocks at people's windows and cars. Noise, waking people up, shaking tree branches against windows where it would frighten people. Elderly people told me, well, I'm afraid at night, I'm afraid to walk in the village. The downtown playground area got a really bad reputation as not a place to let your child go. Yeah, this summer was bad.
So was this law, was that an idea that had been brought up to you by a lot of residents? Or,
Yes, yes.
And then what's the reaction been like since it was passed by the board?
This is really the first they're learning because it was
Okay.
just passed a week or two ago.
Okay.
And I wanted to make sure that it was publicly out there
Mhm.
so that people understood that yes, we took it seriously, and secondly, that there are consequences if
So
kids choose to do
it's in
that.
effect immediately then?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, Dave, is there other, you said you did something similar in Plattsburgh, Rouse's Point had the law, apparently, I don't know if it's still in the books or not. Is this a law anywhere else in the county that you're aware of, other communities?
It's, in short, no, and it's difficult to be able to enact this, which is why I give the mayor and her board an awful lot of credit, because traditionally creating new laws in society as a whole is not a popular thing. People don't want to have one more thing to be governed by, but I think they need to realize again, we in law enforcement do not view this specifically as a law restricting people. We view this as a tool, as an opportunity to identify the ages of the people that are on the streets so that we can safeguard them. We've had a lot of senseless tragedies that have occurred at those off hours because whether it be thrill seekers or whether it be young individuals reaching out with older kids that they are influenced by doing things that they are not adapted to be able to do yet and causes harm, and you end up meeting the parents in the hospital, et cetera, et cetera. So it never is a good mix. But the mayor brought up a really good point because we fielded several phone calls from elderly people in our communities that are scared. And it's a horrible thing to interview these elderly people when they're alone and they don't have family, they don't have anyone right there. They rely on their community to keep them safe. And by not doing this, I think we're letting them down as well. So this is just another step to safeguard that opportunity for elderly to be comfortable in their homes, in addition to the other things we spoke of.
Obviously, if somebody's rattling trees and the sheriff's department is called and they get there 10 minutes later or whatever, those people are probably gone. So will you be just, in general, if you're patrolling through the village, if you see people that look young, you're gonna ask them what they're doing there, or you would just be waiting until there's an incident that particular night, or what's the plan?
Well, good policing, and you hear the buzzword all the time, community policing. Well, community policing is good old-fashioned policing at bottom line. And that basically is good judgment and common sense, stopping and engaging your community at any age in conversation. Our law enforcement people had better be driving through the village, and if they stop it, even if it's an older couple, good evening, ma'am, good evening, sir, you're just out for a night stroll? Oh, yes, officer, thank you very much for your time. Well, we appreciate it. If you see anything out of place, please call us. That's a great opportunity for law enforcement to be effective and to let your community know that you're there. So that's a big part of our job. This gives us an opportunity to question somebody if we see a group of young people that clearly appear to be under the age of 18, most likely 14, 15, 16 years old, we can ask them, how old are you? Now they don't have that opportunity to say, I didn't do anything wrong, I'm not gonna talk to you, and just walk away. If there hasn't been a crime or anything committed where we're looking for somebody, now we have an avenue to engage them further in conversation and maybe be able to prevent them from getting into trouble or being harmed by somebody suspecting to find young people out at night.
So viewing this more as a way to not necessarily get young people in trouble, but just make sure they're out there for the right reasons, or they might be doing the right kind of things and not doing anything nefarious.
It's a proactive tool.
And
That's what.
I would just add, it truly is safety. It really is about safety. A lot of these kids in the summer that weren't doing any kind of vandalism were at risk. They were skateboarding down the middle of the street. They were trying to walk on the arches on the bridge. Dangerous activity that really could be a tragedy. So it's mainly about safety, their safety.
Let me just comment specifically about Rouse's Point. In the 70s, if you remember way back when, the drinking age was 18. And so our issue in Rouse's Point was more of getting people off the street who were actually drinking. It was probably 16 to 22 years old. They were breaking things. People, it's funny you mention that, because in Rouse's Point in the summertime, people would walk along the lake, but they were afraid to go in the downtown area. So this allowed us to do a couple of things. One would be to get them off the street, but also the charge of drinking underage was also an issue. And so if you take that away from them by passing an open container law, then you're in a position where you can just remove them right away. So my memory is that we only had to do it 1 or 2 summers where it was really more of an open container. It allowed us to get people off the street. As I think back on it now, I think our purpose was the public safety issue. It wasn't per se a curfew, but it was more of, we had a specific problem, we reacted to it. We got the same phone calls years ago that you get now, and because once they consumed too much alcohol, they then were unleashed to go out and do other things, and that was another problem, so.
So what happens if you stop somebody and you ask them how old they are and they say they're 18? I'm recording people all the time, and to be honest, I can't tell a 17-year-old from a 22-year-old, you know, so what, you're gonna be asking for some kind of identification, or what this?
It can be a challenge, and again, it's a tool to be able to use to engage people in conversation. You can ask them, did you realize that there's this local law, and a lot of them right off the bat will say, well, I'm 16, that's for under 16. Well, no, it's for under 18, so now they've admitted they're 16. There's so many other tricks of the trade, if you will, during the regular questioning, what grade are you in? A lot of them will say, well, I'm in 9th grade. Well, 18-year-old 9th grader, there are some, but not an awful lot, so that gives us an opportunity to go to the next question. So it's engaging the community, which does include the youth, but engaging the community in conversation. Law enforcement can learn an awful lot. They may make a comment and say, look, we're not out here causing any trouble, but you ought to go see the hillbilly gang. You know, they're the ones that are down there doing all the graffiti. Well, what can you tell me about it? And you gather more intelligence, you gather more information to make the community a safer place. So when I can't emphasize enough that it's a tool, it's not so much a restriction or a regulation. It's a safety tool for the village, but it's also a law enforcement tool giving us a better avenue to engage younger people in conversation. If they're really belligerent and defiant, there's a good chance that they're under age 18, and probably that they engaged in something else. If they just take off and run, most definitely they probably engaged in something else. So all of these variables help us out to be able to work more with the community and make the community a better place.
And I apologize if this was already mentioned. You think you mentioned something about fines, but if you do end up finding out that they are indeed under 18 and they aren't out for one of the acceptable reasons, what is the result? Like, what comes about that?
If they're out for one of the.
If they're not out for one of the acceptable reasons.
Oh, okay. There's a 3-tier warning system. The first one is just a letter. Second is a fine of $100, and third is a fine of $250, with some other little things attached to it.
Okay.
Also keeping in mind that reoccurring offenses like that can end up building into something bigger if you have a problematic situation of children that are just totally uncontrolled by families at home, and they're out every night engaging in criminal mischief, etc., there's a family court process that can be instituted as well. Kids petitions can be filed. This could be a precursor. Nobody wants to go down that road. So this, again, is a great proactive measure to be able to avert families from having to get involved into a more expensive, more labeling system than at this level.
That's good.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Thanks to all of you.